Okay. So a brief background on the work being done at TNC to increase accessibility at our preserves. So a few years ago, a team of people from TNC started to look at the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Architectural Barriers Act and what our obligations were as an organization around complying with accessibility. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, it's a piece of civil rights legislation. It's aimed at removing barriers to participation in all areas of public life. And what that means for us and our preserves that are open to the public or provide public programs seasonally or by appointment, that we have an obligation to meet the guidelines of the ADA to make our preserves more accessible. So members of our legal team and others spent a lot of time developing guidance documents aimed at helping people understand how and when those laws apply. And as you could probably guess, there's a lot of specifics when it comes to the law. There's a lot of nuances when it comes to compliance with the ADA. The good news is that this workshop is not a compliance workshop. What we're really hoping to do today, and what I'm working on as part of my role as the Preserve Accessibility Coordinator, is to help people working at our preserve level and with the public to just better understand what it means to be accessible. Our goal is to help you both meet your obligations under the law and also to just recognize the opportunities we have and the opportunities that exist to make our preserves more accessible to people. So a lot of people, when I meet with them, they've asked, well, what do we need to do to comply? And it's an important question. It's one that is good for us to think about. It's also oftentimes a bit of a nuanced question. And what I'm hoping for is that at the end of this workshop, that yes, you're thinking some about compliance, but more importantly, that you're really recognizing the opportunities we have to removing barriers to participation and welcoming more diverse audiences at our preserves and to our work. So I know many of you are already working to make your preserves more accessible, and some of you are just getting started. We want this workshop to be an opportunity to explore ideas, to share ideas. We want people to feel confident and comfortable asking questions and sharing their experiences. There really are no wrong answers. There's no silly or dumb questions. I really, hope that everyone will take the opportunity today to share with one another. And with that, I want to just keep our community guidelines, our values in mind as we do that. So, leading with our values, listening with an open mind, challenging with care, being curious, expecting non-closure, because we're not going to figure it all out today, but hopefully we'll all go away with things that we have learned. We want to make space for mistakes, for imperfections, for challenging assumptions. Again, it's okay to not have the right answers. That's what we're here to do, is to learn and to share. And I also really want us to build trust with our colleagues and to start to build a peer-to-peer network around this work. As I said, many of you have already embarked on this, and some of you are just at the beginning. So being able to have that peer-to-peer network, I think, is going to be beneficial to all of us as we move forward. So it looks like we have 38 people right now who are on the call. Hopefully a few more will join as we keep going. I want to take this time to do a little icebreaker. So I don't think we're going to go around and introduce everybody, but we could do a little icebreaker. And this will also help us to get familiar with some of the interactive tools that we're going to try to use today for this workshop. So I'm going to start with the question. And Jackie, if you want to pull up our first poll, the question is, how accessible do you think your preserves are for people with disabilities? And this is a question that's on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the least accessible and 5 being very accessible. And again, no wrong answers. it's just to kind of gauge, like, where do people think we're at? How are we doing with this? So go ahead and chime in on the poll, and then we're going to share the results with everybody. And this will be fun, because I think maybe at the end of this, and when we revisit this in a couple of months with a questionnaire, we'll see if people have a different thought on this. Okay. A few people answering, a few more. Give it another few seconds. All right. Okay, Jackie, do you want to share the results? Okay, it looks like nobody feels that their preserves are fully accessible, and that's okay. It looks like people are falling somewhere around, like, maybe a little bit accessible, and okay, that's good to know. I'll be curious to see, what that means by the end of this, and when we get some of Virginia Rose's wonderful insights. So thank you for that. And now one more quick icebreaker is because we're going to use something called the Post-it note whiteboard. So Jackie, if you want to pull up this next poll, this is a little bit maybe more of a fun question for folks, which is, what's your favorite bird? And the way you use this feature is that you can just use your cursor to click on one of the squares and type in the name of your favorite bird. And this will be shared with everybody simultaneously. Let me type in mine too. Awesome. I just recently, beautiful. This is great. Lots of sandhill cranes. I was introduced to those for the first time this year, which is really fun. Roadrunners, American kestrel, the black-crowned night heron. Beautiful. There's some of these I've never heard of before, so this is going to be fun to look those up when we're done today. Beautiful. Kingfisher. That was my second choice. I was like, oh, maybe mine's a kingfisher. Wonderful. Mountain bluebird, red-tailed hawk. Very cool. Great. Thank you all for participating in this. Now, the neat thing about these tools, this whiteboard, we're going to use this one again during the workshop today. And the nice thing about it is that this is something that we can export following the workshop and share with one another, so that we can be reminded of the answers that we included in these whiteboards. So I want to thank everybody for participating in that. Great. Hey, so with that, I'm going to introduce Virginia Rose, our birdability expert. So Virginia is the founder of Birdability. She's a retired teacher, although I would say that based on my experience over this last month, talking with her and working on this workshop, that she is very much still teaching. She's an avid birder, and she's a wheelchair user. She is leading the movement to improve birding experiences for people with disabilities and inspiring people to get out into nature to discover their best selves. So Virginia, I'm very excited to introduce you and take it away.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Lisa, for working with me, and Jackie, and the Nature Conservancy for allowing me to be here. It's quite an honor. I also wanted to say that I am a card-carrying member of the Nature Conservancy, have been for 20+ years. I don't know if you saw my entry, but my favorite bird is the scissor-tail flycatcher. All right, so I'll begin then. In 1973, Jackie, are you gonna pull up my, thanks. All right, so go ahead and go to the next slide. In 1973, I was 14 years old when I was paralyzed in a horseback riding accident, and I've used a manual wheelchair for 50 years this month. "30 years later, at age 44, I found birding and life changed. I should have come to it sooner. I accompanied my grandmother into her 90s as she was birding here in Austin. My mother is still birding at 87. She and I went to the Southeast Arizona Festival and got the berry line hummingbird last year. Birding gave me a purpose. It gave me a reason to be outside again. And as it turns out, as I explored nature, I discovered my best self and my greatest happiness. I remember calling my mom and asking her, why didn't you tell me I was a nerd? My life would have been so much easier. I hope some of you can relate to that. What's funny is that doing anything new in a wheelchair is not especially easy. Let's look at some of the difficulties. Starting with parking. Obviously, if I'm not able to park, I'm not able to get out of my van. Next is gates. There are all kinds of gates that can be barriers. There are minor barriers, like a gate like this that I can tuck under, but other people who have disabilities may not be able to do that. There are all kinds of other gates that are trying to prohibit wheels from coming in, and they're successful. I'm trying to remember the one that I encountered last week. It was a turnstile, and of course, perfectly designed to keep out wheels, and it definitely kept me out. Railings. This is one of my favorite reasons to rage, although I'm not really a raging person. But when I am not able to see through the railings on any of these boardwalks or other accessible features, then that means I'm not able to see the birds that a walking person is able to see. My view line is right at about 3 feet. And so this is all important information for people who are trying to make their sites accessible. Bathrooms, the bathrooms that are available are seldom accessible. And on our website, you will find sources that indicate what an accessible bathroom space looks like. Steps and curbs, mud, sand, ruts, rocks, gravel, cattle guards, cactus spines, and cow patties. This is Texas after all. Cattle guards I can do in a wheelchair, but I don't know anyone else who can or would do such a stupid thing as try to cross a cattle guard in a wheelchair. Cactus spines are self-explanatory and dangerous for those of us who use air-filled tires. And cow patties. Chasing plovers, of course. And cow patties on your feet or on your boots is one thing, but cow patties in your hands, that's something else entirely. All of these things equal a lack of independence. But you see, difficulties are still important because right on the other side of difficulties is empowerment, is joy, is your ability to persevere. When things get hard, can we start by asking, what will the empowerment be? What joy will come of this? I used to tell my students, don't expect your greatest accomplishments to occur in your comfort zone. At the end of the day, I don't come home with just a list of beautiful birds and happy memories. I come home with a very real feeling of accomplishment and pride. I come home empowered. And it's why I say, no one can predict what an individual with an access challenge can or cannot do, not even the person with the access challenge. Take it from me, I never know what I can do until after I've done it. This leads us to the joys. The joys of birding, friendships, almost immediate friendships, travel, physical health, confidence, independence. The community that comes along with birding is just unmatched. Lifelong learning and lifelong purpose. I'm convinced that these two things are the keys to a happy life. There's never a reason to be bored. There's never nothing to do when you're a birder. And obviously the birds and all of these things contribute to empowerment. But after 20 years of birding, I never saw any people with disabilities. I was the only person I saw barreling around after all these walking people. And I wondered, where are they? I determined that they must just not know about it. They must not know that it's available to them. And in 2018, I decided to find them and introduce them to birding so they too could find their greatest happiness. That led to my mission to share the joys of birding with people who have access challenges, to help make birding locations accessible and birding communities welcoming and inclusive. I want you to see the mission in a visual. Realize that these three prongs of our mission have to work in tandem. For instance, if I've worked and we, Birdability, you have worked hard to make our birding locations physically accessible, but we have not done the work to introduce people with disabilities to birding, we haven't met our mission. And if we've done these two things, but we have not created a welcoming and inclusive birding community, we haven't met our mission. These three things have to work together. All right, so the next question is, why do accessible trails even matter? This is a place for you to participate, a multiple choice question. Go ahead and pull up the poll and mark your answer. And Lisa or Jackie, you guys are going to have to tell me what you're seeing because I don't see it.
So Virginia, we've got people are actively taking the poll. About 80% of people have participated so far.
Okay.
And we have a variety of answers, but the majority of people who've participated so far have picked all of the above. So I'll read the question out loud. If there's anybody calling in over the phone that is not using their screen right now, the question is, why do accessible trails matter? And here are a few options for answers. The first is disabled people have as much right to be in nature as non-disabled people. The next answer is nature increases well-being and creative problem solving. The third is exposure to nature decreases anxiety and depression. The fourth possible answer is it allows people with disability independence and autonomy in nature. The next one is it provides people a sense of belonging. And then finally, about all of the above. It's great. All right. So it looks like the majority of people, 32 out of 37 participants, said all of the above, and others selected some of the other answers, which are also correct. So
I'm going to chime in here because I was watching that poll live, and all of the other answers aside from all of the above were people selecting all of them at once.
oh,
So
perfect.
essentially
That's
100%
great.
consensus here.
Awesome. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. So everyone, my assumption is that everybody in the audience today understands that nature is nourishing and healing. What we may not know, however, is that the benefits are even more important for disabled people. The disabled lack the same access to nature experience and education. Exposure to nature decreases anxiety, depression, and negative rumination. Exposure to nature increases well-being and creative problem solving. This research from an article empowering people with disabilities through nature. Why do accessible trails matter? There's ample evidence that time in nature provides a range of physical, emotional, and mental benefits and can enhance a sense of belonging. Yet the people who need these benefits the most, the disability community, are often excluded from the outdoors. Next slide. Experiencing nature is one of the best ways children with disabilities can increase their self-awareness. For the disabled, the ultimate goal is self-reliance, having gained the knowledge and confidence to enjoy nature on their own, creating the ability and desire, creating the ability and desire to experience nature is a lifetime tool. This is one of my very favorites because I'm convinced that we all need to unearth our inner explorer because he or she is probably our best selves. I know every one of you can remember a time when you were in nature all alone, and it is a completely different experience than attending nature with people. Next slide.
Virginia, before we go on to this next part, I wanted to just share when we did the run through of this workshop, one of the things Virginia shared with us was that, you know, for people with disabilities, being able to be independent and to do something without the assistance of another person is just a really empowering and powerful experience. And so, Virginia, I just wanted to ask if you would share a little bit about that, because I don't think that's something that we often think about in terms of, you know, how much time people spend being attended to, and that being able to have that really autonomous experience is incredible.
Right. Thank you for reminding me about that, Lisa. The word is unattended. And when people with disabilities are able to be unattended in nature, there is an intimacy about that experience that is nourishing. That is, for me, I felt like it was introducing me to myself. I felt like it was helping me see who I really wanted to be, and I was recognizing the person I wanted to see. And a lot of times that does not happen if you are attended, if you are entertaining or being entertained. And that's the significance, I believe, for especially for people who don't get alone time in nature. Thank you, Lisa. All right, so the next question is, we know why accessible trails matter. So now we need to find out who benefits from more accessible preserves. All right, so we are going to,
Yeah.
sorry.
That's okay. This is a whiteboard. This is one of our Post-it note interactive tools. Thank you for your patience as we navigate technology. Okay, so the question is, who benefits from our preserves being more accessible? And if there's anyone who's calling in today who's not using their screen and you'd like to participate in this, you can feel free to take yourselves off mute and let us know, and we can capture your answer. Okay, so some of the answers that are coming in is that a lot of folks are saying everyone benefits when we have more accessible preserves. And I think that's a great answer. The whole community, disabled folks and their networks for sure. I would definitely say elders and older people, school groups would benefit from this. I'm going to type in, I think people with small children who are using strollers and other things to help get their families around. Everyone that has transportation to get there, yes, that would be terrific. And I think that is part of accessibility, is how people are able to get there. This is great. People living in urban areas, for sure. Veterans, yes. People who feel alienated, multi-generational families, for sure. It's great. Thank you, everybody, for participating in this. People who, and I think in parentheses it says me, keep breaking their bones. Yeah, it's something we don't think about, is like those times when we may be experiencing temporary disabilities. I know in Vermont, falling on the ice is like a way of life around here in the wintertime. So I can relate to that. Terrific. Hey, thank you for everyone who participated. And again, we will be able to export these and share them in multiple formats after this is over, so that we can have these reminders as we go forward. Great.
Thank you, Lisa, and everybody who contributed. It's warming. This warms my heart to see all of these answers, because it makes me understand more fully that you all recognize that when we make preserves more accessible, we make the preserves accessible for everybody in all their life stages, which we will enumerate in a minute. I love the idea that in addressing the needs of the disabled, we are addressing each and every one of us now and as we age. Next slide. So For Birdability, we are looking at people with mobility challenges, of course, people who are blind, people who have chronic illness, people who are intellectual or people who have intellectual or developmental disabilities, mental illness, and those who are neurodivergent, deaf, or who have other health concerns. But as you all identified in that activity, that's not all. We are focusing on all life stages. Parents with strollers, grandparents with toddlers, older people done with the bushwhacking, people with new medical diagnoses, folks with new or grumpy joints. In short, this is our future selves. We want to be able to bird with our mothers when they're 87. We want to be able to bird with our grandmothers when they're 90. So recognizing that we aren't talking about an other population, we're talking about ourselves. And I think that last activity indicated that you guys are all on top of that. So thank you. So here's what we know. We know that time spent in nature is good for us. We know that birds can be the gateway drug. We know that birding is the fastest growing leisure activity in the US, 45 million Americans in 2022. And of course, some of that had to do with COVID. Next, 1 in 4 Americans has a disability. 1 in 4. 36 million have a mobility challenge. 19 million are deaf or hard of hearing. 16 million are blind or have low vision. I want you to think about this for a minute. Many people then, 1 in 4, are not benefiting from nature. And think about how many conservationists are slipping through our hands. So we know why accessible preserves matter. We know who benefits. What do we do now? We familiarize ourselves with access considerations. This was the first document I wrote for Birdability in preparing for the workshop I gave for National Audubon in 2019. I wanted to write down all the access considerations that walking people may not know about. This is a very brief part of all the access considerations there are. But if you go to our website and look up guidance documents, you can see all the access considerations that we've accumulated in the last 3 years. Remember that when I put this document together, the only access that I could really speak to as a paraplegic using a manual wheelchair was my own lived experience. But as people with different disabilities came to us and said, hey, I want to be included, our access considerations document grew and grew and grew. Let's start with parking. As I said earlier, if I can't park, I can't get out. I use a van, and that requires an 8-foot access aisle on the passenger side. Many times, someone will find a van access sign and put it up in a random parking space. But if the access aisles are not available, I cannot get out. That's not to say I can't do some car birding right there in the parking lot, which I have done. Trail information ahead of time. I want to emphasize information ahead of time and let you know that the greatest barrier to people who have disabilities is information. Your jobs then are not going to be figuring out how to make every single site accessible. You can't do that. I can't do that. No one can know all the disabilities with which people are enduring. So what we can do, however, is provide information about the property. And this is our goal. So if you look at signage, and this is a really important part of providing access, is each of these are important considerations. The length of the trail is important. For instance, it happens a lot to me that I may have to drive 2 or 3 hours to get to an accessible trail that's a 1/4 mile long. As a 20-year-old person, I would be just very disappointed by that. As an 80-year-old person, that might just be the perfect distance. The surface is key. As a 64-year-old person, I'm looking more and more for concrete and wooden decks. But a person who's 20 may be perfectly happy on an unpaved trail. Again, your job is not to be able to predict what all the disabilities are going to be. Your job is simply to provide information, so the person with the disability can make his or her decision about whether or not to visit. The tread width is important. Some people have wider wheelchairs and are going to need wider access. And then there's the grade. Again, 20-year-old me was all into the mountain climbing. 64-year-old me is no, please. So the grade matters. Cross slope matters. Again, when you're moving across a slope, one of your arms, if you're in a manual wheelchair, one of your arms is going to be bearing the entire weight of that distance. Next slide. Bathroom accessibility. I love this slide for a variety of reasons. One of which is, if you only can afford one porta potty, please get one that is accessible for people who have wheelchairs. We all prefer bigger bathrooms, and we all know that. So also, though, be conscientious about this space between these two porta potties. If a person in a wheelchair wheels in here and then opens this door, is she or he going to have enough room to maneuver into the porta potty? All of these things matter when we're putting things together. Also, I wanted to point out these yellow poles, these yellow metal poles. And I don't know if everybody knows what those are called. You guys probably do. But a year ago, I didn't know what these were. And now my previous partner was from Australia, and she said, those are called bollards. And so I said to myself, well, that sounds like a British cuss word to me, but bollards can definitely be a barrier. So be mindful about these. These can keep people from entering. This is such an important part of access. Interpretive signs. I want you to notice a few things. First, notice that the sign is accessible from the concrete pad. So many signs have been placed out in the grass or out in the weeds or in the field, which requires a person in a wheelchair or any other person with a disability to navigate through whatever rough soil or mulch or rocks there may be in order to get to the sign. So make sure your signage is accessible and part of the concrete slab. The other thing I want you to notice is that these signs are shorter. They're shorter so that a seated person can read the information. And not just seated people, kids. The happy benefit of making everything as accessible as possible is that now you're reaching kids in an accessible way. Notice too, in the far right corner of this sign is a tactile feature. And for people who have low vision or are blind, unable to see the bark of the sycamore tree, he or she can feel it and have an experience of the sycamore tree. Notice here is a sound feature that enables people who have low vision or blind to get the same information that all the other people are able to get by reading. Remember, your goal is to provide the same information to everybody. Next slide. Steps or other obstacles. I love this slide because I often ask hosts at different sites, are there any steps? And so frequently they do this. Well, their answer is always prefaced with the word wool, wool, well, and then there's always this. Well, there's a step right here. And so that step may not be a problem for me. That step may mean I have to bring a companion. That step may make that site inaccessible for me. Again, it's just information. It may not be removing all the steps. It may just be providing information about the steps. And I have been trapped in root systems like this more times than I can tell. All right, now let's talk about bird blinds. I'm getting more and more excited as I age and as bird blinds are becoming more and more accessible. I want you to notice this one. I love the idea of a bird blind that doesn't require a roof. It doesn't require a back wall. That still may include benches if some of the viewing windows were lower. Again, remember, I have a 3-foot viewing line. And so if I am to be allowed the same viewing opportunity that other people are offered, then I'm going to need a viewing window that accommodates my site. And also, I want us to think more about how can we create a blind that truly is hiding us, but is also accessible. And that requires a little engineering savvy. I want you to notice something about this blind, however. Does this look like loose dirt? And does it look like perhaps it's eroded a bit? And if it's mulchy, I'm not going to be able to use this viewing window because I can't get there. So again, all these things taken into consideration. Next slide. Maintenance. I think sometimes we forget that access means maintenance. Can't tell you how many times I put my ramp down and wheeled myself right into a gigantic rosemary bush or a tree or a cliff. At any rate, notice this perfectly accessible ramp and platform, but if there's snow and ice all over it or encroaching vegetation, it's not accessible. Notice here railings. I love discussing railings because you do have a measure that you're required to use on a railing, but you have more choices than you realize when it comes to not using wood and instead using plexiglass, such that I can wheel and go sideways right here and look right down and see the ground. And that's where the olive sparrow is. That's where the towhees are. That's where the Kentucky warbler is. So you wouldn't want to exclude me from seeing those birds. And you know who else can see the birds that way? Kids, moms with strollers. So notice that these railings, while doing the trick, are still a little obstructive. Railings now are being done with cables, and the top railing is this thin, so it's not obstructive. There are ways to do it. Notice the bench here too. ADA recreation designs require benches every 1/8 of a mile, particularly for people who have breathing problems, people with COPD, all kinds of other breathing problems that require they have to sit down every now and then. Maybe not just breathing problems, but people with knees and people with hips and people with kids. Next. All right, so now I want to show you how to access the gem, the jewel of birdability. And I want to tell you very quickly how this came about. When I was presenting birdability at the National Audubon Convention in 2019, I was expressing my wish to have all of the accessible parks, all of the accessible birding sites flagged on a map so that I could get in my van and I could drive all over the country and just go from birding site to birding site to birding site. And I mean, that was a dream, that was a wish. And there were GIS story mappers in the crowd, and they approached me afterward and they said, "We can do that." And I was like, "What?" I go, yeah, we can do that. And 5 months later, you guys, I had a draft of this map in my inbox, and it launched 1 month later in March 2020. We had over 500 sites pinned the first year. We have over 1,000 sites with access information across the country and in 15 other countries. Now, granted, 1 or 2 sites in Costa Rica, but we're making progress, y'all. It is happening. Okay, next, I'm going to take you into the Birdability Map.
Are you seeing my browser pop up, Virginia?
I am.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Jackie. All right, and you're going to scroll down until you get to what looks like a grayish box, and you're going to click on it in there. And then can you zoom in a little bit? Right, and so I want, and then can you move side to side so everybody can see the world? Like go across the sea? And I want you to see where the yellow diamonds are all over. So we see some in the UK. We see some in Greece. We see some in Seville. We see some in Austria. We see some in Helsinki in Finland, in Norway. I'm so thrilled about what is happening, that the entire world is waking up to helping disabled people have access to nature. Can you return us to the US, Jackie? All right, so I want you to know that every one of these yellow diamonds was created by someone just like you, who visited a site, completed a survey, and right then and there pinned that site for all to see. In that yellow diamond, you are going to find answers to questions for people who are trying to determine if this is a place where they can visit. So will you please, in the upper right corner, you see a box that says find address or place. Will you please type in Crooked River Wetlands? And then at the bottom, you will see right but very bottom. Go ahead and click on that. And we are going to open this diamond that looks like it's in Pineville. So go ahead and click on that, Jackie. And on the left side, I don't know if you can blow that up, but on the left side will pop up this park. And I want you to notice all the information that this person provided. He or she went through the survey and answered questions. For instance, is this a good car birding site? The person said yes, because a lot of people with disabilities car bird. That's how they bird. That information is going to be critical for them. And then look at these fabulous car birding comments that the person left. Accessible to all, strollers, wheelchairs, walkers, nice paved trail with lots of birding opportunities. This is where we went this year to do our annual bird count. Imagine that information at all of these sites so that anyone, disabled or not, can make a decision about visiting. Can you scroll down a little bit more, Jackie? All right, notice the length of the trail is indicated. Go down a little bit more. Do you see where it says public transportation? This is so key. When I first started Birdability and I was inviting people who are disabled to join me on a birding event, I was pretty cavalier about expecting them to just be able to drive to the site, because I, born of privilege, have always had access to an accessible vehicle. I've been driving since I was 15. It never occurred to me that people don't have a transportation to these sites, my jaw dropped. At which point, I started thinking about the importance of public transportation for the first time. Scrolling down, look at this comment about there are signed, regular-sized, accessible parking spaces. Parking space is a minimum of 96 inches wide with no additional side space for a ramp. So giving you all the information you're going to need to be able to objectively respond to these questions, providing invaluable information for people who are looking for an accessible spot. Let's scroll down a little bit more. Parking comments. This person said plenty. Well, that's encouraging. And look, this is a comment about water fountains available outside buildings. Again, that may really matter to somebody. Let's click that. Let's scroll down a little bit more. Notice all these questions about adaptive equipment available on site. Notice this comment, gated areas, drive-up bird blinds are accessible if arranged ahead of time. The answer is no. So I hope everybody can see that we have written as many relevant questions as we can think of, and we've had a lot of help from a lot of people with different disabilities to make sure we're covering our bases when it comes to access. All right, Jackie, can you scroll or click out of this and scroll all the way back up to the Birdability site review? Oh, wait, yes. Yeah, so I want you to see the how to submit the Birdability site review. And you and I just looked at all the answers to those questions. And I wanted you to see what the survey would look like on your computer once you had decided to do a review of a site. And you would look at the questions and you can see these are the questions that correspond with the answers we just looked at. Can you scroll down just a little bit, Jackie? So you can see that they're asking you to drop a pin at the location of the trailhead, and they give you very explicit directions on how to do that. Can you scroll down? And look, there's the question that you and I saw earlier on that review that said, is this a good car birding site? And then if you'll scroll down, you'll see all of the questions that you can answer to indicate whether or not this is going to be a place where a disabled person could go or a not disabled person. Okay, Jackie, can you go to the next, which is the print site? Yeah, print the site review. So this is for people who want to just print it, print the checklist, and go out into the field. And that way you are in the park, you are on your preserve, and you have all of those questions right there in your hand. And you can go through and check this pretty quickly and then go home and enter the information and you'll be done. All right, I want everybody to notice that all of these questions are inclusion points. We are helping ourselves address inclusion, every one of these questions, which is pretty cool. All right, so let's go back to the slide that had the Birdability map on it. And again, I just want to emphasize and hopefully give you some relief that the questions don't require you to have any disability expertise. The beauty of the tool is that it's completed objectively. And that way, every disabled person looking for information can make his or her own decision. That's their responsibility, not yours. So there are multiple ways that you can participate in helping your preserve become more accessible, or a way for you to identify ways in which it is. So if you had not yet added your site to the Birdability map, this may be your first goal. Now what? We know why accessibility matters. We know who benefits. We know what accessible means, or we're learning. We know how to find accessible birding sites, but an accessible birding site does a disabled person no good if he or she doesn't know about it. So, where do we find people with disabilities in your community? Where would you begin? Go back, please. Yes. So these are questions that we want you to think about, participants. And again, I think we're going to be using the Post-it note feature. Where would you begin to find people with disabilities in your community?
Okay, I don't think there's anyone who's just using the phone today, but if there is and you'd like to participate or share an answer, go ahead and take yourselves off mute and you can just say your answer out loud and we can include it. So some of the answers that people are including are centers for independent living, schools, community centers, rehabilitation centers, senior centers, retirement homes, engaging with people that you meet organically in your day-to-day, physical therapy centers. Let's see, what else do we have? Adaptive sports clubs and teams and schools that offer special education for students with disabilities. That's a great one. Veterans homes. Let's see, is there someone who wanted to share? Who isn't muted?
You are all hired. Every one of you.
It's wonderful. Yeah, state travel websites, rehabilitation centers, churches, town hall meeting, local nonprofits. I think all of you will find that in your communities, there are probably many nonprofits that are providing services for people with disabilities and are looking for opportunities to participate and engage. So those are great places to look as well. Ask a disabled friend or a colleague. Terrific. Let's see. Someone typing in state schools. Yes, I see this one. For the deaf and blind. Yes, some of you may have in your community schools that are serving people with disabilities. I don't know if there's anyone from Massachusetts on the call today, but Perkins School for the Blind is a school that is often involved in community events and working with folks to make their events more accessible for people who are blind and visually impaired. So yeah, oftentimes those schools can be a great place to start.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you again. My heart is warmed by seeing all these fabulous answers. I'll tell you what I did. The first place I went was to disabled groups. So I knew some folks in the spinal cord injury group here in Austin. So I called the facilitator and asked her if I could do like a 10-minute presentation about birdability. And she said, sure. So I joined the general meeting and did my presentation and asked for people who might be interested and took names and contact info, and I left mine with them. Then I went to the amputations group and I did the same thing and I picked up some more takers. Then I went to the multiple sclerosis group, same thing, and stroke survivors. And then go ahead and go to the next one. And like so many of you said, assisted living centers. Now, there's all different kinds of living centers. And what I did is I just called the activities director and told him I was with Birdability and that I wanted to offer a field trip. And the residents who were able to leave the property could get in their, you know, their van and meet me at an accessible birding site. And so the van pulled up and all these people with various abilities got out and we went on one of my very favorite accessible trails here in Austin. And it was fabulous. And so we set up quarterly walks and, you know, the activity directors are just looking for something interesting and exciting. And so what better to do than teach older people how to bird? All right, what's next? Kids disabled camps, near and dear to my heart. I was fortunate enough to attend summer disabled camps up in the mountains in Colorado. So important for kids with disabilities to be amongst other disabled kids in the mountains, experiencing what they can do. I want to get birdability programming at all the kids' camps across the country. I just feel like that's the best place to start. Next, veteran services. And I saw someone include the veterans as a really important population. I've written articles for Wounded Warrior and done a panel for the paralyzed veterans. And this is obvious to me, the healing nature. Next, special education services in public schools. And I heard you guys saying that too. The special education supervisors, again, like the activity directors at assisted living centers, are looking for interesting, outside, safe activities for their kids. Next. The Easter Seals organization here in Texas, I met with the regional director and let him know what I was doing with Birdability. And he recommended I go to an Easter Seals gym here in Austin. I didn't even know there was one. And so I went and I picked up 3 more takers and they've been with me on my Birdability walks ever since. Rehab hospitals and gyms. I heard you guys talking about that too. And I was actually a client of a really innovative rehab group here in Austin called Rehab Without Walls. And these therapists take their patients, outpatients and or inpatients, to their happy places. And so obviously mine is on a birding trail. And so when I presented this idea to them, I had 50 therapists in the room. And I said, who all would be interested in taking their patients to meet me at the accessible birding sites? And they all raised their hands. So we set up quarterly walks and those therapists bring their inpatients and outpatients to join me. Schools for the deaf and blind. Again, I heard you guys commenting on how important this is. Next. Independent living centers. The independent living centers are the ones where the residents are frequently able to leave this facility. The assisted living centers is for students, for residents who are not able to leave the facility. And so I was able to just set up birding stations for folks there. I was able to get Wild Birds Unlimited to donate a bird feeder, donate the pole on which the feeders hung, and just went around and tried to get people to donate like a bird bath and seed and create, you know, in doing that, creating another little community. I think one of the things I want to drive home is that every single one of us has a change maker in him or her. And it's not as hard, I think, as people make it out to be. Creating little communities with getting a bird feeder at a nursing home is amazing and possible every day. Next, scouting and 4-H groups. Obvious, again, scouting, I want to make sure that they are meeting their EDI aspirations. And think how fabulous it would be for the scouts to be able to make access improvements on these properties. So 2 ways in which scouting and 4-H groups can meet their needs. And then I heard somebody else say adaptive sports organizations. So these organizations are very, very popular, and look for one in your community. The people who are leading these organizations are real go-getters. They know a lot, and they know a lot of people with disabilities. So sometimes the adaptive sports groups are full of, what can we say, just very testosterone oriented sports, and they think birding might be for sissies, but see if you can get 1 or 2. Next. Remember, we have to not just create physically accessible sites, we have to create welcoming and inclusive organizations. So how do we do that? What do they look like? We start by changing the definition of birding. Mainly because the word bird, and you hear people far and wide say, well, I'm not a birder, but, or I wasn't really birding. I was, they're sort of forgiving themselves, right, for not having a certain expertise or for meeting a certain bar on what a birder looks like or does. So we want to address that by taking some of the intimidation out of that word. Next slide. So birding, we've decided now, is a verb, and it is the act of enjoying wild birds. That's all. The act of enjoying wild birds. It occurs in many forms, including, but not limited to, looking, listening, moving down a trail, sitting inside a bird blind or other structure, sitting outside, from a moving vehicle. We like to call it birding at 70, and that's not the age, that's the mile per hour. Via a computer, with binoculars, without binoculars, with in-depth knowledge of bird identification, or with very limited knowledge of bird identification, independently or with others. All of these things equal birding. When we're talking about a welcoming and inclusive environment, we want to also think about our language use. For instance, some people use the phrase bird watcher, but we know that not every birder watches birds. One of my dearest friends is an amazing birder. He is low visioned, that has 5,000 birds plus under his belt. And it's amazing just sitting beside him, the ways in which he can ID birds everywhere, all over the place. So we call them birders now. And instead of bird walk, and I am so guilty of this. For 50 years, I've been calling it bird walk. And now my peers are telling me, you need to not use that word anymore. And my first response is offense. I'm like, hold on a minute. You, a walking person, are telling me, a paraplegic, that I cannot use the word walk anymore. Anyway, I'm coming around and using the word bird outing, bird field trip, birding event. More language use. The word handicapped and impaired has a denotation that is not as positive as we want it to be. So now we are using has a disability or is disabled. Now, interestingly, I, for 50 years, didn't like to be called disabled because I felt like I was the most able-bodied person I knew. However, in an effort to be respectful, I think it's important always to say, if you prefer to be identified as a handicapped person, that's fine. We'll do that too. Next. Normal. You hear so many times people referring to an able-bodied person as normal, as regular. We want to avoid those kinds of words and instead express exactly what they are. They are able-bodied. They are sighted. They are a hearing person. They are neurotypical. And that way we are not excluding people inadvertently. We hear the word wheelchair bound. I heard that word last week when I was in a hospital visiting a friend. I actually saw it written on one of the whiteboards in a patient's room. I heard it yesterday in a board meeting. So we are working. Whenever I see this, I see a person all wrapped up with a rope and only their heads peeking out. So now we're using the phrase wheelchair user or seated viewer. Go ahead. And apparently this word to impaired has a negative denotation. So instead of saying vision impaired, we say blind or has low vision. So welcoming and inclusive organizations do these things. First, make sure that you've created an inclusivity and diversity statement. And this is a statement to which everyone should be volunteering and thinking and brainstorming. What does that statement look like? Once you have created this statement and agreed on it, hold your employees, volunteers, and organizations accountable. Make sure that you are holding accessible bird outings as part of your regular programming. What that means is we are just integrating into our activities access. It's going to be just part of what we do naturally. It's not going to be special. It's going to be integrated. Next, include image descriptions for social media posts. Include closed captions for all webinars and meetings, even if no one has asked them, as you guys did today. Thank you. Remove financial barriers to access whenever possible. I think sometimes people forget that finances can be barriers. Provide honorariums for speakers and consultants, etc., as a respect. Next. 3 things savvy trip leaders can start doing today. First, be familiar ahead of time with the physical accessibility of every outing location. I think that's going to sound like it's harder than it is, but to me it just means scouting the spot, looking for maybe the 6 things that we discussed today: parking, restrooms, steps, etc. Go ahead. Post pertinent access info ahead of time. This is the most important thing. Go ahead. Include a welcome statement at the beginning, including name, pronouns, and an invitation to share any access needs. So for instance, when I lead, I say, my name is Virginia Rose, my pronouns are she, her, and I am a paraplegic and have used a manual wheelchair for 50 years. We do this in order to invite all of our participants to do the same and to feel comfortable doing the same. And then there's the land acknowledgement. It's becoming more and more important. And my land acknowledgement looks like this. I want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Tonkawa. I wish to pay my respect to their elders, both past and present, and offer our gratitude for their care for and teachings about our earth. Next. All right, so reviewing appropriate field trip etiquette is even more important when people with disabilities are participants. Let leaders lead. Help people understand that if you are a field trip leader, you need to be in front and they need to be not in front. And you can, of course, you can say that in a funny way, but just to remind everybody. Remind all your people that you are looking and listening on this outing. I say that in an effort to quell some of the chatting. Next, suggest that wheelchair users stay close to the leaders. Realize that wheelchair users have different sight lines in getting people on the bird or on anything else. Reinforce the importance of moving behind, not in front of people who are using binoculars. And I, out of experience, can tell you it is so much easier for people to walk in front of a seated person who is using binoculars. I would reinforce that etiquette. Realize that you are modeling important etiquette for other participants, perhaps not disabled. Next. Go ahead. Learn basic disability etiquette. Speak directly to the disabled person, not to his or her companion. Offer assistance at the outset. If it's accepted, ask how to help. If assistance is not accepted, respect the independence and say, okay, just ask if you change your mind. Don't touch a wheelchair without permission. If you would normally shake someone's hand, do so in this situation. But one caveat. I had a person on a trip with me who was a quadriplegic, and his arms were placed on his armrests, and I wheeled up and I held out my hand. And he said to me with a smile, I can't shake hands. And my heart sank, and I'm sure I blanched. And I said, I'm so sorry. And he said, no worries. So I guess I bring this up for a couple of reasons. First of all, I am learning every single day, like you are, what access means. I am humbled by the people who have disabilities on the trips with me. And finally, I'm trying to pay close attention. Next. All of this is to say that the best we can be is waiting for us in nature. And that's what I discovered as I became a birder. Thank you. Next slide.
Okay, thank you, Virginia Rose. Yeah, so thank you so much for all the information you've shared. I wanted to invite people, if folks have questions and you wanted to type any of those questions into the Q&A, feel free to do that and we can take a look at those. I also wanted to invite people, if people need to take a 2 or 3 minute break to use the restroom or to get a glass of water or a cup of tea, why don't we go ahead and do that now? And then when we, in about 3 minutes, we're going to meet up and break out into breakout rooms and just kind of talk about how we can take this information that we learned today and turn it into a goal that we can have for our work at our preserves. So again, folks, if you want to put in any questions, and Jackie is going to automatically assign some breakout rooms. So we're going to work in some small groups where we can just talk a little bit about creating an actionable goal, something that we can do. And it doesn't have to be something monumental. This could be something around creating that inclusivity statement. It could be removing a physical barrier. It could be doing the birdability checklist so that it's something where your site appears on the map. But let's do that and break out into those breakout rooms. And we'll do that in just a minute. Give people a chance to get a drink of water. Our group just got a little bit smaller. So if folks, if you're willing to turn your screens on so we can see who's here, we're trying to figure out how many breakout groups we want to do. And I'd love to see who we have. Hi, everybody who's still here. Great. Because we may not even need a breakout room if we only have a few people left here. I wonder if we scared people away. Thanks all for being here. Oh, goodness. Okay. Well, I think since we have such a small group here, I don't know, I'm seeing 15 people. Maybe we could just talk as a group and kind of come up with this and, you know, what would these actionable goals look like? And also, let me look at the Q&A. We did have a question that came up, Brandy. Is it helpful to submit sites that are only partially accessible to the Birdability Map? And I think that's a great question. Do you want to answer that one, Virginia?
Sure. I want to emphasize that your goal, again, is to provide access information about the site. It's not your job to like designate this site as accessible. Your job only is to identify what is accessible about your site and be happy with that. That's important information.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was thinking about your step example, you know, knowing if you need the companion, knowing if you're capable of doing the full trail. And so I wanted to make sure that that was, I mean, there's such a range of accessibility. I don't think there's like a perfectly accessible site anywhere, but I just wanted to make sure that that was okay. You know, even if it's information that says that you can't reach a trail, if it was okay to put in the map.
Right, exactly. I think you get it. Thanks, Brandy.
Yeah, and I think too, just to remember that accessibility, a lot of times we think of accessibility being mobility, and I think sometimes the universal symbol being the person using a wheelchair. It's like we kind of think about it as being more about mobility, but I think really the range and diversity within our communities, it's great. And so just when people have information that's accurate and up to date, it's really going to help folks to be able to decide how they would like to participate. So yeah, let's see. Do we have any other I don't think we have any other questions.
Madeline
Well,
has their hand raised.
Okay, go ahead,
I
Madeline.
actually have a question. Can multiple people submit like the survey, or is it only once one is submitted, that's it for your site?
I think the answer to that question is when you are on the site and let's say you select the GPS points, right, for where you are right then that is going to be the thing that gets pinned. It's very possible that people are going to be on the other side of that park and they will too submit a survey. And the reason why I think that's okay is because there are certain parts of a park that are more accessible than others. And so, for instance, one of my favorite parks here in Austin has two entrances, one on the east side and one on the west, and the west is not accessible. And so people have different habitat on the west side and they enter their bird information for the west side and access information for the west side. So it's, you know, I think all of those submissions are important.
Great. Anybody else have questions? And yeah, feel free to, we're such a small group at this point, you can ask the question if you want to unmute or if you wanted to type it in.
Yeah, I
guess
have a
this.
question.
Oh,
Well, go ahead, Lou.
it was just a follow up on that one. It made me think. Can you go back in and update your entry if you're the original author, assuming that we continue to work on improving access?
Right. So we are in the process of trying to allow those folks to go back and update as needed. And right now that information needs to first go to info@Birdability. And we have someone who is making those changes. And that's primarily because we are in partnership right now with National Audubon for that map. And so we can't just, give everybody willy-nilly permission to get in there and mess around. So until we figure this out and figure out the best way to have people make changes, then this is the way it will be, just info@Birdability, and there's someone assigned to make those changes. Thanks, Lou. Mace, did you have a question?
I did, Virginia Rose. Thank you. This has been really great, really inspiring. I've led bird walks, birding outings.
Yeah.
See, I already learned something today.
Yeah.
Plenty with everyone well abled, and they're hard enough. And I just was curious how you structure your outings, or what tips you would have for making an outing successful, for helping people with disabilities enjoy the birding experience. What tips would you have, please?
Right. Well, I can kind of tell on myself. When I led my first walk with 3 women who were in wheelchairs, who were complete strangers to each other. And see, that's part of the beauty of doing these ability walks, because you're bringing in people from all different places. And so on the very first walk event, I am going down the trail. After giving an introduction, I'm going down the trail and I'm hearing birds and helping, identifying where the birds are and identifying the song and seeing the birds. And I turn around and those women are like half a block behind me. And all 3 of them are circled up discussing their boots, their backpacks, their wheelchairs, their water bottles. And I'm like, you guys are missing the birds. And then I realized, oh, this is about people too. It's like, it was such a fabulous experience. And it taught me that I need to be listening very closely to the people. So I would say that would be my first piece of advice, is listen carefully to the people who are on your walk who have some disability. You are going to be more attentive, and you are going to help them get on the bird in ways that are going to be a little more difficult, perhaps, because you may have to squat down, or you may have to be communicating in a way that's slower. You may have to slow the pace down. I give myself a lot of space and permission when I'm on these walks, and I feel like in doing that, I'm giving that to them. So remembering that everything you do as a leader is modeling. And I feel like you cannot go wrong by asking questions.
Yeah.
Lots of question asking.
Virginia, you mentioned once too, when we were talking, that people who are, especially if you're leading a walk or an outing that has folks that are using a wheelchair, that they're a couple feet below you. And so the sound of people's voices, it might be a little bit harder to hear. So again, like some just best practices might be like, how's my volume? Can people hear what I'm saying? And I think asking those questions in a way that's to the whole group can also really help people to be able to answer and say, actually, I haven't been able to hear, or whatever that might be. So just kind of taking into consideration like where people are at, even physically in space during those events.
Thank you for remembering that, Lisa. You just remember all these little things that you and I talked about in the last month, but it is so true that the easiest way to include disabled people is to speak to them and at their level. Like, for instance, I am sitting 2 feet below the conversation. And don't forget that when I'm sitting 2 feet below the conversation, I am not part of the faces that are looking at each other and involved in that conversation. So my face is below that. And that is a great example of not being included. And that's no one's fault. That's just kind of how it is. But being mindful of it is really helpful. And once the others watch you include that seated person, they will be doing that too.
Yeah, that's great. Anybody else have a question at this point? So I'd love to just open this up for discussion, just to for people to share ideas about what is something that you could do today or tomorrow or in the next 3 months that could increase accessibility at your preserve. Is there anything that people want to share or think of that this workshop helped you think about in a different way?
I'll go.
Oh, go ahead, Madeline.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you can go ahead. I already spoke.
One thing that I think that I could do in the next even couple of days is just adding the information about the trails and the consideration and the access like on our website. That's just something small to start with of, people view our website all the time and we have a lot of good information there, but I think that's something that's easy enough to add and just start with pretty quickly.
That's great. Yeah, and I'm just going to type that into the chat so that we can capture that. So adding information about trails to your website. It's a great idea.
I was just going to say, I'm going to look at that site survey in more depth to kind of see there are some considerations with my own mobility impairment that I think about inherently, but some of the areas where I haven't really considered in the past, and kind of start thinking about information gathering when I'm at a trail for different accessibility needs than my own.
I'll just add, I'm from the New Jersey chapter, and we have signed up for the All Trails Public Lands portal, which once I find it, I can put a link for those who are interested. And I've been kind of trying to leverage the trail profiles to include accessibility information in addition to the, our Places We Protect pages. All Trails does provide, some basic information like trail length, and I believe some of them have the elevation gain. But I've been trying to, in the actual descriptions of the trail, include like surface type and if there's a slope and things like that. So if anyone's interested in learning more about the All Trails Access portal, I'm trying to find a link right now for the program that I have. I can keep digging and put it in the chat.
And can I just jump in and say, Lily and I have worked together and it's just been a complete joy. She's so open and creative and helpful. Thank you, Lily.
Right back at you. Thank you, Virginia.
I guess I'll just jump in and say, Virginia, your presentation was beautiful and it moved me to tears there at the beginning. But I'm a teary person, so I don't know, that's just me. But I feel the same way about birding. I discovered it when I was working in South Dakota, and we have the Whitney Preserve there, which is well known for birding, and met an incredible group of people that I miss very much now that I'm in Montana. But I just really hope that we can. I'm the conservation lands data manager, and I'd really love to aggregate all this information into one place and then be able to push it all to you at some point for your website or for your map, so that you can exponentially increase your yellow diamonds. So we'll have to try and think about how we could do that.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if anybody that's on the call, do any folks, when you offer programs, or do you offer programs at your preserves? And if you do you ever talk about disability? Do you ever do outreach to the disability community? I'm just curious to know if folks have had actual experiences at their preserves.
I do outreach at a preserve in Northern California, and we've traditionally only done outreach on a trail that goes through, basically a really rugged trail that goes through a canyon. And so I've never considered it accessible in that way, but just in the last couple months, this spring, we've been adding in a new route it's basically a gravel road, but it's perfect for birding, and it has a lot of really nice sites as well. So I've just started adding that back in, and now I'm thinking about ways that we need to make improvements to the trail, and also ways that we can document it. So Birdability Map will definitely be one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Scott, for sharing that. What's the name of your preserve, Scott?
It's the Dye Creek Preserve.
Okay, Dye Creek Preserve.
Mm-hmm.
This is Lou in Idaho, and I just say we're on that journey. We're sort of just taking the first steps and building our network with some of those communities we talked about earlier, and we have some field trips planned with members of that community, just to help us really think about what we can do from their perspective to make the preserve more accessible, and how we might prioritize that, because I think the opportunities almost seem overwhelming at first, and so we really want to sort of break it down and prioritize. And so the conversation today about other communities to reach out to, other groups and communities to reach out to, is really helpful. So we'll keep expanding that network here.
Yeah. I like, Lou, what you said. I began Birdability with the whole idea and philosophy, and I still have it, that I want to start with what I can do. Mm-hmm. I want to find all the trails that I can do without really being worried about any improvements. I just want to experience that. It's important, I think, for all of us to know what we can do first. And then once we have understood that, that's then when we start looking around. But for us to begin trying to improve when we aren't even sure yet about what is accessible is a mistake. And I like to also let you guys know that very many disabled people understand that if we are going to St. Edward's Park here in Austin, that I'm going to get the golden cheek warbler in the parking lot while I'm in my van, because I can't do any other part of the park. But we all understand that. You know, there's an understanding that starts happening between walking people and people who have various disabilities. All my peers know that when I go birding with them in New Mexico, that they're going to go 4 miles up to get the same birds I'm going to get in the parking lot. So it's funny, it's happy, it's endearing, and you know, you will learn, just like we all learn about each other, what is possible.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's great. And Virginia, Megan shared that, well, Megan doesn't work on a preserve. If they're allowed, they'd love to share the presentation recording with their volunteer programs and encourage them and their volunteers, who oftentimes know the trails best, to collect information on the trails, which I think is an awesome idea. Like,
Yeah.
I think, you know, at our preserves, being able to collect information, and as Virginia has said, it's really, you know, these reviews are from the perspective of the person using the trail. You don't have to be an accessibility expert. You don't have to know anything at all about accessibility, but more, it's about sharing your experience. What is your experience at the trail? And I think that's a really great thing about the way the Birdability Map and survey is designed, is that it's kind of like, it's just talking about what you're doing and what you're seeing and what you're experiencing. Great. Well, any other questions, or anybody else want to share an idea they have that they can take back to their preserve? Maybe you've done something at your preserve that's really exciting that you'd like to share. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for being here today. And Virginia Rose, thank you so much for just sharing your wisdom with us and your experience. And we really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. And I wish I could come and visit every one of your preserves.
Yeah.
So I'm asking for you to invite me.
Okay. That's good to know.
So you got your work cut out for you with 840.
Oh, I know. That's when I start calling for Sherpas and rickshaws and zip lines.
Yeah.
Thank
That's
you.
terrific. Yeah. Thanks everyone. Thank you so much. And Virginia, I'm
Thank
happy
you
to stay
guys so
on for a
much.
second too. So
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your work.
Thank you.
You.
yeah.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Happy
Thanks.
birding.